This is now, I don't want to just stomp on him with one of these West Texas ad hominem arguments here. Habermas responds in a way quite movingly to this objection. He says, you have missed the point, because what I'm talking about in communicative rationality is a process of enlightenment that includes all. Janitors, cooks, everybody includes us. It includes everyone. So we've missed its universality. But more importantly, and I think this is a beautiful quotation from Habermas, he says, in a process of enlightenment, there can only be participants. No analyst and patient. So in that way, the model was misleading originally. No Lech Walesa and the lead. No Clinton and the Clintonians. No Ross Perot and United We Stand America. In a true process of enlightenment, there can only be participants. Now, that, stated that way, Habermas's communication theory, looks like a linguistic variant of anarchism, and I like it, because it means that everybody gets a chance to talk. I enjoy that. So now, let me, in the time remaining to me here, let me move a little further along to how he's reformulated the theory, and he's had to under the force of various objections. And they've come from all kinds of people. I gave you the Marxist-style objections, but hermeneutic or interpretive people in the humanities didn't like his account of the humanities as limited either. In other words, they didn't like that account as it limited to a single interest, because they pointed out something that's come up in here several times, and that's that the sciences are also interpretive. And they went, look, the work of interpretation isn't just for us humanists, but everybody interprets. I mean, it was Galileo that said that the world was like this giant text and mathematics was its language. Well, the analogy of the world as a text is one that's very familiar to scientists. To read, as it were, and interpret is not something that's limited to books alone. Interpretation, in fact, may be one of the fundamental conditions for selfhood. One of the problems in the current situation with what I have called previously information overload and complexity may be the difficulty that gives us in interpreting everyday life situations. Because everyone, whether they know it or not, is always already an interpreter. When you stop at a stop sign, you've interpreted something already. Now, you've done that without too much interpretive work. Red, in our country, means not only commie, it also means stop. You know, I mean, red means commie to me, means commie, anarchist, hippie type scum, but it also, when it's a light, means stop. Acts of interpretation go on constantly, all around us, in all forms of conversation. There's, as it were, in our encounter with the world itself, we see some smoke down the road. We have to interpret. Is it a wreck? Do I need to go another way? People who've lived together a long time and think they know each other well are still constant interpreters. My wife will see a certain look on my face, and it's interpreted. And I don't think correctly, but she just goes, and then we're off on something, you know? But I mean, this shows the ubiquity of interpretation in human life. I mean, in a certain way, one of the characteristics of what the self is, and one of the reasons it's under siege, is we're interpretive beings. And now, by the late 20th century, we're in a situation where interpretation has never been more difficult. Never been more difficult. I can name artifacts that we've developed technologically that are almost completely closed to interpretation, and I'll name one, although we attempt to interpret it. Television. Television tries to interpret itself to us, bypassing the upper brain functions and directly feeding into our minds. This is why I said off camera between classes that Orwell was a pie-eyed optimist. 1984 arrived in sort of the early 70s, and Orwell's vision of a horrible future, which was a boot stomping on a human face forever, is a utopian image because he assumed there would be resistance and human faces, both of which may turn out to be false. So, I mean, 1984 is not a book that scares me anymore. I mean, it's again, I know that last time I outrageously said that Herbert Marcuse was the Norman Vincent Peale of the 60s. And now this time I've been forced to say that Orwell was an optimist, you know, a sort of my corollary to his little cautionary tale. Well, in the face of all this, I think that the tribute I want to pay to Habermas, and what interested me about Habermas's work, was to try to defend reason in spite of all of these things that I've said. You may notice that I gave an account of cynical reason, but I didn't give you an account of how I might stand vis-a-vis it, and I've said a lot of cynical things. Well, what I admire in Habermas is the attempt, without being a complete idiot, to try to develop an account of reason that runs against cynical reason. It does say to us, we can speak to one another. We can have processes of enlightenment. We can learn to say what is true to one another. Now, it is true that this is endangered in ways that he didn't discuss in his early work, which he does in his later. His later work, especially a very large book called Theories of Communicative Action, Habermas once again returns to the attempt of defending this idea of communicative reason, and he adds many more problems to it. First, he recognizes something that I've already pointed out, which I think he always recognized, but he again, in typically German intellectual fashion, he needed time to write a 4,000-page book on it. In my book, when I gave an account of his book, I did it in 31 pages, and people said, well, that's too short, and I went, no, his is too long. But he realizes by the time of his mature work that money and power as abstract systems to start our everyday life in the ways we talk, and that those systems will have to be, as it were, harmonized before we'll be in a position within which it will really be possible to speak to one another face to face. And I hate to be quasi-theological, but perhaps if we could do that, then we wouldn't see through a glass darkly. You know, maybe then we would have a way to find our way out of this dilemma, which I have called this terrible entwinement of enlightenment and terror, barbarism, and myth. And if nothing else, Habermas's project offers us one powerful voice that argues that such a possibility exists. And so for that, if nothing else, I think he deserves a lot of credit. Thank you very much. That's Habermas in a nutshell, very short. Thank you.